Shea was NATO's spokesperson during the alliance's air campaign in Kosovo in 1999, which aimed to halt the humanitarian disaster in the country. Each day, for 78 days, he explained NATO's operations to the world's press. As the 10th anniversary of the Kosovo campaign approaches, NATO Review takes Shea back to NATO's press room to ask about Kosovo then and Kosovo now.
Jamie, did you believe that Operation Allied Force would always be a success?
Well, yes, I did, and the obvious reason is I felt that an organisation like NATO, the United States, major European powers, would put its credibility on the line in a massive way, much greater than anything NATO had ever done previously, by launching that operation. And of course, once the credibility of the Western democracies was on the line, for people like Tony Blair or Bill Clinton or Chirac, it also became bound up with domestic political credibility. So I felt, having started, whatever, how long it would take, no matter how difficult it would be, NATO would need to see it through. I also felt that the Allies had taken a lot of time to get to the decision. There had been months and months of negotiating with the Serbs and with the Kosovo Albanians. There had been months and months of discussing the internal strategy, the air plan, the whole campaign. So it struck me that we would have difficulty getting to the decision, but it's typical of NATO that once that decision was taken, through thick and thin, it would stick. And in fact, I even believe that we would have used ground troops, reluctantly but inevitably, if the air campaign had not worked.
So even in the darkest days, there was never a plan B?
No, there really wasn't, because NATO had invested, as I said, all of its credibility in this operation. And NATO, after all, is not like another organisation. It's not an economic organisation or a social organisation. It's a political military security organisation. And if you're going to say to your members, hey, we're serious about defending you, we're a serious organisation, we do what we say and we say what we do, then the credibility factor is much, much, much more important for a security organisation than for a different type of international grouping.
This was part of the battle here in the press room. What preparations were made for the information war and the disinformation war?
Well, I've got to be honest about this. We weren't as prepared as we should have been. Maybe I take responsibility for that. All I can say is that Kosovo was something totally new for NATO. NATO had never been at war, even if we didn't call it a war, rather a conflict, but we'd never been involved in a live military action of this dimension before. Now we're in Afghanistan and shooting and combat's taking place every day. It's become much more familiar. But Kosovo was really a loss of virginity in that way, of moving for the first time from security essentially through deterrence and prevention to security through action and combat and casualties and risk-taking. And I don't believe, because it was new, that we really sort of thought through in advance exactly what was going to change once the first bombs in Allied force were dropped. I think, secondly, there was a view which proved to be totally wrong, that Milosevic would throw in the towel after a couple of days of NATO bombing, that he would immediately turn around and say, I'm not willing to escalate. I've tried to call NATO's bluff, I've fouled, I now have to go back to the negotiating table. So we didn't prepare for a long campaign, and therefore we didn't prepare for the media stresses that a long campaign would inevitably bring in its wake.
And so what were the main lessons learnt from this media as a weapon battle?
Prepare for the worst. Don't go on rose-tinted spectacle scenarios that it's going to be all right on the night. Prepare for the worst, and prepare to be criticised. I think also, frankly, at the time, we felt here that we were doing the right thing. We had a moral, just cause. We'd tried negotiation. We'd played it by the book. We'd gone to the UN, tried to get a Security Council resolution. We'd threatened force before we actually used it. We tried to come out with an equitable agreement for both sides, which the Serbs reasonably should have accepted, and that therefore public opinion would overwhelmingly support us. It would be, what the Americans call a no-brainer, and that therefore, the media wouldn't be a problem because they'd all be cheering us on. Somewhat naive. as it turned out, we discovered that even if people believe you have a just cause, they don't necessarily agree with bombing, they don't necessarily agree with your tactics or your strategy, they don't like collateral damage, the dreaded moment when with the best laid plans things start going wrong and you actually kill some of the people that you're trying to help, and that also the Serbs would be effective at running their own sort of counter information campaign against us. So I think now we recognise that any kind of military operation is going to be controversial with the public. Some will be pacifists at any price. Others, as I say, will be more focused on is this a winning strategy. Others will just get frustrated that the thing is dragging on for a long time before producing success. The media, in any case, see their job not as being cheerleaders but asking difficult, searching questions. So lesson number one is prepare for the worst and organisation, organisation, organisation. You don't succeed in these ventures simply by relying upon master messages or gifted spokesmen, charismatic communicators. No. You've got to have proper media organisations that prepare the facts, that investigate, that deliver the message in the most effective way. And you can't take the media side less seriously than you actually take the military operation itself.
A lot of the questions that the media are asked about were about the airstrikes, but also about the strength of the unity of the international community. Between the airstrikes and the international community's unity, which do you think was the most effective weapon?
Well, I don't think the airstrikes were as effective as we'd hoped. I mean, let's face it, we know that now. The problem with air power is that if you use it in a very decisive way, you inflict tremendous damage. On the economy, on society, even on civilian populations. You could do that in World War II, Paul. We know that. Allied bombing of Germany, Japan. You can't do that anymore. You have to use air power in a much more discriminant way, according to the rules of international law. But let's be honest, it makes it less effective. Also, or at least it means it takes longer to produce an impact. So we would have hoped, of course, that we would have destroyed more Serb tanks than we ultimately destroyed. But that's why, as I mentioned a moment ago, people like Tony Blair, towards the end, were thinking seriously that it would take a ground campaign and not just an air campaign to prevail. Fortunately, we didn't have to do that, but we were thinking about it towards the end. So my sense is that it was definitely Allied unity that prevailed. Milosevic, I think, hoped, like Napoleon used to say, Lord, if I have to fight, let it be against a coalition. Coalitions are weak, they divide very quickly, people break ranks, and I think it was only after 78 days when Milosevic realised that despite all of the problems we had, that wasn't going to happen, that NATO was going to stay united, that he called in the United Nations and he started to look for a way out.
If we compare the unity of the international community at that moment and then compare it with the Kosovo Declaration of Independence, that unity is obviously no longer there. Even within NATO, there are members that haven't recognised Kosovo. Does that disappoint you?
Well, I'm disappointed in the sense that I would have hoped that we would be much farther along the road with Kosovo than we are. That, in other words, it would be a healed, reintegrated, reconciled society with a booming economy, on its way into Euro-Atlantic integration. And clearly, that's all still very much in the future. So I'm certainly disappointed that we haven't made more progress there over the last 10 years, and that many of the fundamental issues that were there in 1999, particularly in terms of relations between Serbs and Albanians, remain. And obviously it would